Hey, what's up? This is Marcus, and in this video I will use my 15 years of experience at the highest level in Pokemon VGC to give my opinion on the items that are in Pokemon Champions and to discuss how useful they actually are. Now, as we know, there has been a little bit of debate around the number of items in the game, and while I didn't list every single one of them in this tier list, you can still see that, there aren't that many there. We will come to that in a little bit. But I will just go through them one by one and then give my opinion on where I think they rank. So first up, we've got the Leperberry, and already we gotta give a D tier here. This is one of those where I would say, don't use. Leperberry restores power points, so you can use attacks more often. There were some strategies at some point using recycle, but then it's just to stall out. But even with the new amount of PP that a lot of moves have, generally not worth it. The battles will be far too quickly for that to matter, so that's why, don't use it. Next up is quite an interesting one, the Lumberry. And by the way, this whole tier list is going to be my opinion around the format, the current format MA in Pokemon Champions. So while there are other formats where Lumberry maybe would not be considered viable, I think in this format it's definitely an option. It's just in the B category here, so I would say it has some competitive use. Maybe you have like a Garchomp that you really don't want to be burned or put to sleep in some occasions. So it's okay to use, but there are also some better items. In a similar category, I would say is the next one, which is the Mental Herb, which I will also put into B tier. So when coming up with this tier list, I think the two main factors that I'm thinking about are how strong is the effect of a certain item, and then secondly, how often does it come up. So far, I would say the two other berries we talked about, the effects are, not that strong, and they also don't come up that often. I think with Mental Herb, the effect is pretty solid. Especially if you want to use it, for example, on a Trick Room Pokemon, and you really don't want to be taunted on those, of course. So I would say effect is strong, however, it doesn't come up very often, doesn't come up a lot at all, so that's why I would still put it in the B tier, which is, I guess, reserved for very specific use cases. So on a Farigiraf, if you really want to set up Trick Room and you're worried about taunt, then it's totally fine. However, other than that, doesn't have a lot of use cases there. Next up, we got the King's Rock. This is another one of those where I would say, it's generally not viable. There are very, very limited use cases involving the move Fling. So that's why it's not in the don't use tier, because this is reserved for things where I would say, okay, no matter what you're doing, definitely don't use them. But King's Rock, so it gives all moves a 10% chance to flinch. So I'd say the effect is pretty strong, flinching is pretty good. However, you need to outspeed, and it's only a 10% chance, which is why, the likelihood of it actually activating in a meaningful position is just not high enough. That's why I would put it in the C tier, where, it's generally not viable, but if you use it with Fling, it will give you a guaranteed flinching from using the move Fling. So that is a strategy that can be used on Pokemon that are fast and have maybe Fake Out anyway, maybe those that don't have access to Fake Out for a surprise flinch. I would still put it in the C tier. Then we get Bright Powder. I think Bright Powder goes into it's kind of the same tier as King's Rock, where it's generally it's not viable. It gives you a 10% decrease to the accuracy of your opponent, which, once again, the effect is pretty good, avoiding damage completely, that's great, but just a 10% chance is just not very high, and you can't really rely on it, so that's why I would put it in C tier. However, there are a couple of applications, for example, or most notably, I would say, if you have a Garchomp with Sand Veil, which gives you a 20% chance to avoid any damage in sand, and that stacks with Bright Powder. So then we're actually talking about a reasonable 28% chance, I think, in total. It's definitely reasonable kind of chance, those two combined. So then there maybe we're talking. And then you can, for example, use the move Substitute, which allows you to, if you're faster than your opponent, you can just keep using Substitute until they will eventually miss. And then you will have a free substitute and can go for some attacks that way. So generally not viable because the chance is just not high enough. But on very specific sets combined, maybe there are also some Snow Cloak users that might want to do this now with Mega Frostlass. But yeah, generally it's not a good item. Next up, we got the Scope Lens, and I have seen at least one team flying around with this item in particular. Generally, Scope Lens alone is not strong enough because of how the increased crit chance kind of works. But it only becomes relevant when we add in another modifier. So this could either be a move that has a naturally increased critical hit chance, because then you can go all the way up to 50% with Scope Lens and a move with increased critical hit chance. Or if you're using the move Focus Energy, then you can actually guarantee critical hits when combining it with this item. And there are a couple of Pokemon where it might make sense to do this. The one Pokemon in this format that comes to mind is Hydreigon, because yeah, it also has the move Draco Meteor, which is already pretty powerful, but it will of course decrease your special attack by 2 stages every time you move it, you use it. And then if you land critical hits, though this debuff will be, or this decrease, the reduced special attack will be ignored. So then you can set up with Focus Energy once, and then you can keep clicking Draco Meteor. And for that specifically, I will put it in viable. However, I guess you could also argue maybe it also deserves to be in the kind of C tier, where it's like, yeah, you wouldn't want to use this unless you have like a very, very specific reason for it. All right, next up we have the Mystical Water, and this is, yeah, kind of a stand-in, kind of a substitute for all the 20% boost items. Generally, I would say this would go into the viable tier in a lot of other formats. However, because of the lack of items that are available in this format specifically, I will put it in A tier, in pretty good, because actually the 20% increase can be quite meaningful sometimes, because especially if there is a Pokemon that is calculated to take a specific attack, if you add in the 20% boost, then it can often just go over the tip there and get the KO that way. And so yeah, this Mystical Water is also stand-in, as I said, for Soft Sand, Miracle Seed, like all the other items that have the same effect. Black Glasses, also notable in this format on King Gambit, for example. So I would say it's kind of somewhere between pretty good and viable, but I would put it in the pretty good tier for now. Okay, next up we got another berry. This is the Citrus Berry, and if we think about our little logic here again, how good is the effect? Healing 20% at 25% is a pretty solid, pretty good. 25%, that's quite a lot. And then how often does it activate? Well, actually pretty often. Because whenever there is a move that, for example, would do 60% of damage, you take 60%, then you heal with a Citrus Berry, and then you take another 60% the next turn, and because of the healing, you would actually take this extra hit. This is when Citrus Berry is most effective. And in this format, I will actually give it an S tier, because it is very, very splashable. It can work on a lot of different Pokemon, whether they are really defensive, but also on some offensive Pokemon that want to avoid those KOs from like double attacks, or from just moves that would do in the kind of the 60% range, just over half. Their Citrus Berry is very, very strong. One additional comment about it, where Citrus Berry really shines, is usually on Pokemon that have some sort of recoil move that do damage to themselves. Notably, this could be Arcanine or Incineroar with Flare Blitz, because then you actually get an option to kind of activate it on your own terms, rather than hoping for your opponent to activate it, because at the highest level, players will try to play around Citrus Berries. If they expect it to be there, then they will try to hit you first with a move that does maybe like 40-45%, and then with a stronger move that would pick up the KO without activating the berry. All right, next up, this is, I think it's called the Raspberry. It's not very good, and this is also kind of all the berries that just heal one status. There might be cases where you could say, okay, well, maybe Chesto Berry if you really want to play against Sleep, but generally speaking, the Lumberry is just superior. The only exception where I would say, okay, it's maybe the Chesto Berry could actually go in the not viable tier, because with Chesto Berry and Rest, maybe there are some use cases where you don't want your berry to activate on any other status condition, because you could just use Rest to get rid of that status condition anyway. However, Chesto Rest is not that good in doubles, just because there's usually no time to get it off. And that's why I would put all of those berries in the D tier. Yeah, unfortunately, don't use them. All right, next up, the Choice Scarf is another one that I will have to put in S tier. It is one of those choice items. It will make you locked into move, which is a huge drawback, but the increase is incredible and it happens every time. So every time you use a move, you will always have the 50% boost to speed, and 50% boost to speed is a very, very powerful effect. So in fact, it is, I think, the first item on our list that we're talking about that actually has a very significant drawback, which, it locks you into one move. But still, this is very, very powerful. It allows Pokemon with a mid-speed kind of tier level to outspeed the fastest Pokemon in the format. Of course, very, very important to kind of know your math and to run some calculations. Maybe look at like a speed tier list just to see how fast you need to be on your Pokemon holding the Choice Scarf so that you can outspeed, for example, Aerodactyl or the Sneasler or whatever you want to outpace. But this allows you to maybe get some surprise KOs. It allows you to keep some Pokemon in check that otherwise would maybe be too strong because they're really fast. And so overall, one of the best items in the game, period. And also in this format, MA definitely very, very deservingly here in the S tier. And then next up, we got another contender for S tier. I think I will put it in between Choice Scarf and Citrus Berry. So maybe I'll need to go over this again to try and order it a little bit more. But Focus Sash, also an S tier item. So once again, what is the effect? If you're at full HP and you would be knocked out, then you will actually not be knocked out, but you will survive on just 1 HP. And the Focus Sash can only activate once per battle. If somehow you manage to go all the way back to full HP, then it wouldn't activate a second time, which is kind of like a small, drawback. Well, it's not really a drawback, but the effect is really, really powerful because the difference of surviving a move and being knocked out by it, that is huge, and that can definitely swing battles completely. It's not very strong on defensive Pokemon because they can usually shrug off at least one hit, and it is only relevant whenever you would be one hit KO'd. So you need it at full, and then the one attack brings you all the way down to the Focus Sash. So I would say it doesn't come up that often, which is why maybe on some teams that maybe have a lot of really bulky Pokemon, you don't actually need to have it. However, in a format like this, where there are really powerful Mega Pokemon in the format as well, having a Focus Sash, even on some of the Pokemon that are maybe a little bit more bulky, so for example, Venusaur is one of those that likes to have Focus Sash because, it could still be hit by a really powerful Heat Wave from a Charizard Y, and then with the Focus Sash, it can take the hit. So, really powerful effect, especially strong on frailer Pokemon, could be used maybe on a Sneasler, could also be used on bulkier Pokemon. I've seen a team pretty high in the rankings that had a Kingambit with Focus Sash, because then you can actually surprise your opponent by going very, very fast as well. So, that is also an option. But overall, one of the best items in the game, and in this format, especially due to also the lack of other options, probably the most powerful item on frail, fast attackers. And next up, one item that was very, very fun to get access to the very first time. I don't know how many of you remember in Generation 3 going into that cave and collecting. I don't remember what you needed to collect, but it made me feel when I was a kid and played through this, I was like, oh wow, like this has to be the strongest item ever because of how hard it was, how hard I worked for it. Unfortunately, nope. This is also a D tier item. Shell Bell. It just doesn't heal enough for it to be worth it. We will maybe talk about this again when talking about leftovers next. But yeah, Shell Bell, it heals based off of the damage that you were dealing. But even if you deal like a lot of damage, the healing is just not good enough. So yeah, it's not worth it. There are better healing options, namely the citrus berry, and we'll come to it next, are leftovers. Leftovers, I think, is a little bit of a debate for some players. I think for me, it ranks pretty solidly in the A tier. I think there were some formats where leftovers maybe was a little bit overplayed, and also sometimes we have formats where it feels like it's a bit underplayed. So leftovers is just very, very consistent. The effect will activate every turn unless you're at full HP. So there's a little bit of, some turns where it doesn't activate. And then it will heal 1/16 of your HP, which is 1/4 of what Citrus Berry does, but Citrus Berry is a little bit more situational. And then also the Citrus Berry, well, it's just one time, whereas with leftovers you get just continuous healing. This is especially powerful when combined with Protect, because often there are going to be situations where you want to protect anyways, but protecting with holding the leftovers item also means you get just a little bit of extra recovery. And the thing I think about leftovers is the fact, well, it stacks up. So the longer a Pokemon is on the field, then the more recovery it will get and the more benefits it will gain from this item. I think we still need to figure out the best ways of using this item, because sometimes, the extra 1/16 of HP is not enough to change if a move is a 2-hit knockout or not. So very often you need to stay on the field for at least, let's say, 3 or 4 turns for it to actually kick in and to actually do anything. And because the format right now is pretty fast-paced, and because, Mega Evolutions are often the bulky kind of Pokemon that stay on the field for quite a bit, we don't have a lot of the Pokemon sets figured out yet, I think, that can make use of leftovers best. But due to the lack of better items, I will still give this an A ranking in this rule set right now. Okay, well, there's, I guess, technically another healing item, the Oran Berry. Don't use the Oran Berry. Definitely not. And then I think next up we have a couple of items that maybe some more newer players might look at and be like, oh wow, like this is actually pretty powerful. Like the Focus Band can make you survive a hit. But yeah, it's just a 10% chance. The effect is great. It doesn't matter, unlike with a Focus Sash, where you need to be at full HP. With a Focus Band, actually, you don't need to be. It doesn't matter how much HP you have. In fact, you could even be at 1 HP and still have it activate. And you could also have 2 Pokemon attack it with different attacks, and it could activate twice. But yeah, it's just a 10%, which just is not enough to make it worth it. Of course, the effect really powerful, but again, here the topic of consistency is the problem, because it's just not consistent, and therefore, there are better options that are more consistent. As I said, in a lot of these kind of questions and what's better, which item is better, it's always about consistency, and Focus Band not consistent, therefore not worth it. Yeah, another one that falls in the same category is the Quick Claw. Quick Claw, I would say, well, being able to move first is especially relevant on slower Pokemon if they aren't the fastest Pokemon on the field. So think about it. If you have like a Sneasler that is already the fastest Pokemon on the field and it's holding a Quick Claw, it doesn't actually do anything because you would already be moving first. So couldn't actually make use of the item. So it's more for some slower Pokemon that maybe, I don't know, like a Rotom that maybe has like a little bit of a mid-speed tier, or like some slower attackers. I think the problem with this item is especially the fact that you have no idea when it's going to activate. So the effect is solid, and I think it's a 20% chance to activate. I think it's 20%, which seems reasonable enough. So you might play in ranked battles and you might see the Quick Claw activate, and sometimes you might even lose to it. But the problem is you will not know when it's going to activate. So maybe you have your moves planned in a certain way, you're thinking, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm in a bad position here, or I need to switch something out. So you're not going to stay in and bank on Quick Claw activating, right? And therefore you will have less positions where it will actually be super impactful. I don't know if that makes sense, but maybe some of you out there, you're just like, okay, you know what, I trust the Quick Claw, I'll just go for it. But I think if you're trying to play consistently, you will often play more in a defensive manner in turns where it would be high impact. So let's say it's a turn where they have a Pokemon that is faster, and you're worried about being knocked out, but if you could move first, you would knock it out. But if you move second, then they will knock you out. In a position like this, you would probably tend to go for maybe a protect or maybe switch out, but you wouldn't just stay in and bank on the fact that Quick Claw activates. And it is more so in turns where you can afford to take an attack and then hit back. Those are the turns where you can afford to stay in and attack, and then maybe you get lucky with a Quick Claw activation, and then maybe it helps you. But in the turns where you actually would want Quick Claw to activate, then often it's more consistent to just, protect, switch out, whatever. So therefore, in my opinion, not worth it to use. All right, next up we have the White Herb, and I think this one is an interesting case because it was severely outclassed by Clear Amulet in a couple of previous formats. But in this format, I would actually put it in A tier. I think White Herb is pretty good. There are two main use cases. First, just like Clear Amulet, which isn't in the game yet, but doesn't matter right now. So White Herb actually allows you to get rid of the negative effects of Intimidate. And Intimidate is the most relevant stat drop in the game, inflicted from the opponent's side. So the White Herb can be used on physical attackers, like for example Garchomp. I feel like I use Garchomp quite a bit for examples with these items, but Garchomp is one of those where you could use almost all of them that are viable on it. But you could use it so that if your opponent has an Incineroar and they try to intimidate you and they bank on the fact that they will then maybe they can take your Earthquake or whatever, but with a White Herb you will get rid of Intimidate and can do a lot of damage. So that's the first use case. And then the second one is on Sneasler specifically. There's a nice synergy between its ability Unburden, which allows it to double the speed if it consumes its item. So this could also be the case with like a Focus Sash. So if it's you put the Sneasler, you use Psychic on it and it goes down to 1 HP, then the Focus Sash activates and it will get the double speed. But with White Herb, it's quite nice because, well, firstly, you can use it against Intimidate, but then secondly, you can also self-activate it by using Close Combat. This is the most notable way to do it because, Close Combat, it would drop its defenses, but then you activate the White Herb and then you actually get to go fast and you are still at you're still healthy. Unlike with the Focus Sash activation, you would be at 1 HP, and then maybe you can't really do that much anyway. You would be in range of any priority move. White Herb, very good on Sneasler. And then I saw one game recently where someone was actually using Parting Shot on their own Sneasler to activate the White Herb, which I thought was really clever and a really cool way of using this as well. It was a position where they had Fake Out Pressure with Incineroar, forced the opponent to double protect and then use that time to actually go for the White Herb activation using the self-Parting Shot. So definitely a cool way to use this item as well. So I think it's pretty good, and I would put it up here. And then next up we have the Choppleberry. I think this is probably the last one I will talk about more. But Choppleberry is for all the type resist berries. So whether it's your Wakanberry, Rindoberry, you name it. And I think in this format as well, it is pretty good. Well, there aren't that many other great options, and having these kind of type resist berries, as people like to call them, allows you to take a hit that would often KO you. So this is especially good on Pokemon that maybe don't have that many weaknesses, and maybe there's just the one weakness where, if you didn't have that weakness, that Pokemon would actually go somewhere. It's also relevant for 4-time, for quadruple weaknesses, if you are often seeing your Pokemon being knocked out by this 4 times weakness, and you want to kind of stop that. So Troppleberry is a good example of that because you can use it on King Gambit, for example, so you can take some close combat or low kick better. There's also, Troppleberry could also be used on Incineroar. Incineroar also likes to use Shuka Berry, for example, against Earthquake or other ground type moves. So I would say, yeah, it allows you to give some kind of, to mess with the type chart just a little bit. Of course, in Scarlet and Violet, we had Terastallization to do that. So the type resist berries weren't seen that often because you could just go for the Terra. Now in this format currently, it's not possible to Terastallize. Therefore, I think it's actually a pretty solid item. I would probably not advise to have like more than 2 is probably the maximum I would go on these on a team. Just because I feel like, yeah, the S tier items are so much stronger, and it is still like a little bit kind of situational. Like in a lot of cases, these berries won't activate. They will only activate if you are hit by the super effective hit. So the effect is solid, and the chance that it gets activated, is also okay, but your opponent has to do something for you. And whenever your opponent has to do something for you, of course, that's a little bit inconsistent. So that's why, I think they're fine, but they're in the pretty good tier. Yeah, and then, the last two, Light Ball. If you're using Pikachu, you should always use it. Then for Pikachu, it's S tier. For everything else is don't use. So yeah, I'm not even going to put it anywhere. And then the Mega Stones, similarly, you need to have them on the Mega Pokemon, but can't have them anywhere else. So I think that is it for the tier list. Let me see if there's something I want to move around within the tiers. I think maybe the 20% boosts are actually a little bit lower. Like generally speaking, I feel like the type resist berries are a little bit better just because you can maybe get in an additional hit. So I think this is probably the cutoff point here. Between these, it's hard to say. Maybe, it depends. On Sneasler, White Herb is of course higher up. Leftovers is better on some more bulky defensive Pokemon. But I think overall, this is probably how I would order them. And down here, it doesn't really matter. As I said, don't use these. But that is my tier list for Regulation Set MA. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with some of my choices, which might be the case. And then I also wanted to give a quick highlight to the course that Wolf and I were working on, where if you want to get better at competitive Pokemon, if you want to get better at VGC, we're working on a guide that will release on a weekly basis over on Wolf's Patreon. I will put the link in the description, so go ahead and check that out. If you're new to the game and you want to get better, have fun with that. And until then, see you for the next video soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.